Good evening. This is a special meeting of the Harbor Advisory Board. It's Thursday, June 25, 5:30 p.m., and it's being held via teleconference on Zoom. So let's start off by seeing if we have a quorum. So I'm going to call the roll in no particular order. Well, yeah, I'll start where we usually sit. So Gene?
I'm here.
Okay. The fishermen representatives are not with us this evening. They're out making a living. Lynn?
I'm here.
Okay. Mark?
Present.
Dana?
Here.
And Cherise?
Here.
So we have a quorum. Call the meeting to order. The next item on the agenda is public comment for any item on this agenda. Zeke, do we have anybody on the line?
No, sir, not this moment.
Okay. Ms. McPherson, are you with us? Our council liaison is not with us at present, apparently, so we'll move on to agenda item number 1. Agenda item number 1 is update from the Finance and Budget Ad Hoc Committee on the committee's recent activities, including review and input on harbor capital and operational needs. So it says that it's an update from the ad hoc committee, but unless Mr. Blackford, how would you like to proceed with this? Do we have a meeting, or would we like to?
Well, Eric has a very, very detailed presentation going over this information, and any commentary that I would be bringing in would be just discussion with regard to his extensive report.
Okay, and I feel the same way. So unless anybody has an objection, Eric, why don't you start us off, please? And your mic is muted, Eric.
It is. I thought I just unmuted it. All right, you got me now?
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to indulge your indulgence for a minute here, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the agenda items, I wonder if running item number 2 first, which is more budget updatey, give you all the numbers, kind of give you a picture for the playing field, and then go into number 1.
Completely agree.
Might make a little more sense.
I completely agree. Is there any objections from the board?
Oh, no objection.
Okay, so we'll swap the 2 and go to agenda item number 2, please.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint here. 1 minute here, 1 second as I pull that up. Okay, see how I succeed in screen sharing. Okay, everybody see?
If you could, can you move it at all? Can you move it to the left-hand side a little bit?
How's that?
That's better.
That work okay?
Looks good here.
Okay, so this is a status on the current fiscal year budget, FY 19-20, and then the FY 20-21 budget, which just got approved by the council 2 nights ago. Specific kind of emphasis on the economic impacts we're having from all these COVID-19 pandemic closures, and then initiatives that we're doing as a city and a department to try and assist our leaseholders and others with, rent problems they may be experiencing paying their rents. So status of this year's budget, FY 19-20, our budgeted revenues were $2,102,000. Actual revenues to date are $1,467,000 and some change. Our revenues typically lag considerably because we don't get our percent gross revenues in until July after the fiscal year's ended and our leaseholders add it all up and figure out what they owe or don't owe. Other revenue line items, if you take the lease revenues out and look at all of our other line items, which are mainly slip and mooring fees, various visitor serving fees, but mostly slips and moorings. Our other line items are coming in at about 86% of budgeted, meaning we've got 86% of it in the bank so far, with a 1.5 month to go. So we're going to be close on meeting our numbers. You know, most of our mooring and slip rents have been coming in full. We haven't been having any of those rents being deferred. It's mostly been the release rents, which I'll get to later. So we're going to be close on making our slips, piers, and mooring rents. They're pretty close to what we are budgeted. So it's really going to depend on what happens with the leases. On the expense side, we're budgeted at $2,063,500. Our actual expenses to date are $1,761,000, which, if you look at it from a cumulative standpoint, we're about 85% spent with a half month left to go in the fiscal year. There may be a little bit of lag. That number could be off by as much as $10, $15, maybe $20,000, depending on where the accounts receivable folks are up in City Hall and whether everything's been posted or not, but it's pretty close. All the big ticket items are expensed for the most part. Legal, the cost allocation, our loan for the South T Pier. So we should be okay because most of those big ticket items are expensed and factored in already. So we're looking pretty good. My guess is we're probably going to fall somewhere between, 93 and 95, 96% spent when the year ends. Any questions on any of those?
Nope.
Okay, so we anticipate about a 20% decrease in percent gross revenues based on what we typically get in the second half of March, April, May, and June. I looked at several leaseholders and got their data compared to what they reported for the whole year over a couple of different years, and they were pretty consistent. About 20% happens in the end of March, April, May, and June. So equated onto what we were anticipating for percent rents, which is roughly $500,000, 400 and some odd $1,000, we could be seeing about $150,000 shortfall in our percent gross rents. On the minimum rent front, as you may or may not know, early on in this pandemic, we allowed our leaseholders to defer their minimum rent payments. Most of them are paying monthly, although not all. But a fair amount of minimum rent payments were deferred. Through June, it will amount to just short of $140,000 in deferred rent. What we do with that deferred rent is yet to be determined. I'll get into that a little bit later. So, we could make all or most of that up, or we could end up somewhere in between that and not getting any of it. So we'll get on those a little bit later. Any questions on those?
Oh.
So what we've done, what are the austerity measures we've taken to address, what we're going to see is potential pretty drastic cut in revenues. We've cut back on a reserve harbor patrol and lifeguard hours pretty considerably. Although our lifeguards, we've beefed those back up over the last couple of weekends, just based on the visitors we've had on the beach. It's been an astounding number of people that are coming here. It looks like 4th of July weekend, and it's middle of the week. So we've beefed our lifeguard numbers back up to account for the needs on the beach. We laid off our maintenance aid person that we had working about half-time up and down the waterfront. He's back. You'll see him, but he's doing it on a volunteer basis. That's Roger, bless his heart. He's still out there doing it, but on a volunteer basis. We put a freeze on all non-critical spending. We've put a hold on all of our capital projects. They're generally funded from our accumulation fund. In the event that we need that funding to make up for our operational shortfall, depending on how this year ends out. We've taken full-time pay and full-time employee pay concessions. We've got one administrative position that remains unfilled. As you remember, Charlie was administrative tech. She moved over to rec 2018, late 2018 or 2019. We went to a half-time position. Sherry, she took a full-time job at Sprouts. And so we've not filled that position. So we've really got a full-time position gone unfilled, which is essentially our layoff. And our contract law firm, A&W, has taken a voluntary fee reduction. They've reduced their fees to help with the city's shortfall, not just our fees, but with the overall fees of the city. So that's what we've done to address the shortfalls. Any questions on those? So on to next year's budget was just approved by the City Council on Tuesday. The assumptions that I made going into that budget, I'll get into, but the budgeted revenues that I have in this year's budget, $1,935,000. As you remember, we were a little over $2 million before. Budgeted expenses, $1,911,000. So a very thin margin there, 20 some odd $1,000. Great from an operational standpoint, but not great from a capital standpoint, because that's the extra we need to put in the bank to do capital projects. The assumptions going into this budget were percent gross revenues will be down by 50%. That's kind of the industry thinking right now in the tourism industry. Although, like I said earlier, based on what I've seen here in the last week and a couple of weekends on the waterfront, it makes me wonder, but that's what we're anticipating. That'll mean close to a $250,000 loss in the percent gross revenues. Discretionary, another assumption I made, our discretionary vessel related fees will be down about 25%. That's mostly transient slip rentals, not necessarily full-time slip rentals, but mostly transient and some other fees we get in. So we're going to assume those are going to be down about 25%. So that's why those numbers are down. How are we still balanced, you might ask? Well, not having a full-time position is a big part of it. Basically, we've cut services. We've cut the fat years ago. We're down into muscle, and we're probably going to be hitting bone here pretty soon if things don't turn around, depending on how they turn out. Similar things we've done in this coming budget year to address the shortfall: reductions in reserve harbor patrol hours, reductions in lifeguard hours. Again, we're relooking at those just based on our patronage on the beach. The full-time employee pay concessions go through the remainder of the year. We're continuing to leave that maintenance aide position laid off. We're going to leave that administrative position unfilled. Cut my many budget line items by 25%. Elimination of non-critical travel and meetings. Probably about the only travel I'll be doing this coming year would probably be to Washington, D.C., and that's only because that gets grant funded from the Cable Committee. And the contract law firm, again, they're continuing with some of their voluntary pay reductions or fee reductions. Any questions there? So on to initiatives or other programs we're assisting our waterfront leaseholders. So as I said earlier, through June, we've got close to $140,000 in deferred minimum rents. What's to do with those rents after the dust settles and things get back to whatever our normal is going to be? Right now, the council has approved those rent deferrals, no late payments or any penalties. We basically, our lease policy group got together and has started looking at different options that potentially might be put into play to help address it. And then there's basically three options we've come up with. One, and these aren't in any particular order, and again, these are just options being explored. These aren't anything that are in place. These aren't anything that's been approved by the council. These are just potential options we've identified. Number one is full payback over time. Interest penalty free, about a year to pay off, June 30, 2021, maybe some incentives for early payoff, and maybe potentially add some time to the back end of your lease to quote unquote make up for lost time. So that's one potential option. Another potential option would be a percent gross based solution, meaning you refer or you revolve. Look at really percent gross and what was actually made as the basis for your rent. So instead of charging the minimum rent, the monthly minimum rent, you basically charge whatever they made in percent in revenues as compared to what their percent gross is in their leases. So if your monthly rent was $30,000, your minimum monthly rent, but your percent gross. Your revenues, percent gross applied to it, resulted in your rent is $12,000, then your rent would be $12,000. That's one potential option. Another variation of that is what we call sort of percent plus program, where you do something between what I just explained, the minimum monthly rent or minimum percent gross rent, and your normal minimum monthly rent. So somewhere in between the two, to try and make up some of the difference. And then participation in that we require maybe completion of some agreed upon public improvements over time on your lease site or elsewhere. And then the third option that we explored would be true rent waivers or rent relief. In other words, forgiving rent. Options or different permutations under this would be maybe a rent based on actual revenues earned as compared to what you earned last year, meaning let's say over a period of time, over the closure time, your revenues were 75% of what you made last year because of the closures. So you take your rent, what your rent should have been, and you multiply that by 75%. So you knock it down by what the economic impacts were. Another option might be some sort of a blanket rent relief applied equally to all leaseholders by some sort of methodology. And a third option, which I guess would apply to both of those, seed into there, would be participation of, again, some sort of agreed upon public improvements. All these options we looked at in very broad terms. They have potential gift of public fund issues. They all must be equally applied to all subtenants. In other words, it can't just be the master tenants that would be able to take advantage of this, but it has to somehow apply to the subtenants because we don't want anybody to go out of business. And all the options have a lot of details that would have to be worked out in order to enable them. Next steps in these potential options: obtain legal review of the gift of public fund issues, work with the leaseholder stakeholder group that's actually being formed right now. I've had a couple emails and spoken to a couple of leaseholders that have agreed to try and set up a representative group of leaseholders to bring some of these options to and see what might be workable. Work out those details with that group and with our lease policy group, which has been a wonderfully productive group, and bring some options to the city council for ultimate approval. Whatever we end up doing, obviously we apply to the rents that have already been deferred, but that methodology could be applied to the future if we end up having to go down this path again, if things get shut down again, or shutdowns continue to where revenues are down. So those would be the possible options. So tell me the good news. This too shall end. The economy was pretty solid going into this, so we're at some point hopefully we get out of this. Like I've said, but you look on the waterfront today, it sure doesn't look like there's anything going on, but it could just be a quick little pulse from people being tired of being inside. New revenue sources are being pursued, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Waterfront RV and tent camping opportunities we're pursuing to put in place to potentially earn a decent amount more revenue on the waterfront. Paid parking is starting to head down that road with the city, looking at for the Embarcadero. So we'll be looking at that. And then the potential local relief and recovery measure for the ballot come next November, which could take several forms. One might be, Measure Q like property or sales tax measure or other measures. So the city's exploring maybe a November ballot measure. Another good piece of good news, I wish it was next year, but it's the year after, is the 2022 is the last year of our $134,000 South T-Pier loan payment. So that'll effectively put $134,000 more in our budget, which is a pretty significant chunk. So we got another 2 years of that, 2 more payments of that. And then redevelopment projects coming online relatively soon. Morro Bay Landing is online. The master tenant there, Bob Fowler, was looking at seeking a restaurant tour for upstairs when all this hit, unfortunately, but hopefully once all this ends, that gets back on going and gets going online. Rose's Landing is currently under construction with adding 10 or 12 hotel rooms upstairs, which will be a big boost. Three Stacks and a Rock Brewery is working on moving into the aquarium building. House of Juju is currently adding some more seat capacity on the water side of their lease, in addition to doing some other stuff out on the walkway. Those are the short-term things. Further out, and Sharice, I apologize because I keep referring to it as Off the Hook, but what was commonly known as the Off the Hook site, which is now Harbor Walk. What's your name?
Harbor Walk Plaza.
Harbor Walk Plaza, the old Off the Hook site. Kind of on a pause now because of all this Corona COVID stuff going on, but that'll hopefully get under construction this fall. Libertine, that lease is expiring. It's a short-term lease there expiring in September. We're going to start figuring out we're going to put that out to bid or what we're going to do with that. And then the aquarium site, in Morbay, the old Morbay Aquarium site and Central Coast Aquarium, and their larger plans to come in and build a modern aquarium on that site several years out. Gene, I think you've got a little update to give on the aquarium, maybe?
Yes. On the existing building right now, I'm working with 3 stacks and a rock for tenant improvements, and we should be ready to submit those plans, probably middle of next week. And then on the aquarium project, I recently spoke with Christine Johnson, who was the executive director, and this is probably a month ago. I asked her to reply recently, and I have not heard back from her, but as of a month ago, they shut down the aquarium down there. All the animals have been released back into the wild. Basically, they are shut down at this point, and they are financially strapped for a while. But they still would like to get back to Morro Bay at some point in the future, but they're not sure when. So,
yeah,
their first goal is to get Avila Beach up and running.
Yeah, we've heard the same, and they're kind of in hibernation right now. So those, I mean, who knows what will happen with that in the longer term, but, all those ones we just listed, as those come online, those are all going to help. That's all going to boost up our revenues and not just on those sites, but hopefully with others as well. So that's the good news. When we get there, how we get there, yet to be seen. Any questions, comments?
Has anybody, this is Mark Blackford, has anybody done a review of the current lease verbiage to see if there's any force majeure clause that would be applicable in such a situation?
We'll definitely, as we go through the deferred rent issue and looking at, the potential gift of public funds or other issues, we're going to have legal review all of our leases. I don't think we have in any of our leases an actual clause named force majeure, but there is force majeure-like language in several sections. So we're going to be having a legal look at that as well. That'll all get factored in.
Eric, on the 3 options, do you have a preference?
No, they all, we met for 2.5 hours last week about this and fleshed out these ideas. They're just ideas. There seem to be the hard part is we really need something
Quickly.
Simple, relatively simple, that can be applied across the board, that doesn't require us having to go to each leaseholder and negotiate something separate, because then it becomes a beauty contest, one between the other, and apply equally to subtenants. And those were the 3 that seemed to really bubble to the surface as being the most viable options. Not to say there could not be more. I mean, we'll meet with the leaseholder group as well. There definitely could be other options, and hopefully there will be.
So would you describe that as an ongoing process?
Yes.
In terms of identifying the options and those that are end up being the most attractive?
Yes. Yeah. I'm getting legal review now, and then hopefully the leaseholder stakeholder group will coalesce here maybe next week. I've heard there's a meeting potentially on Tuesday of the leaseholders themselves. And I don't know if they're going to officially try and elect somebody or 3 people or whatever, but hopefully they'll send 2 or 3 people forward that can meet with our group, and then we'll start arm wrestling over things and just see what might work best, and then figure out what the details are, and eventually get it to the city council.
Does the city, and by that I include the harbor department, does the city have some sort of critical path on this process and a target determination date, or is this?
Well, the critical path obviously is going to be getting to the council as soon as we can with something. There's only one council meeting in July. It's on the 14th. I don't know that we'll be ready for that, knowing how the council agendas publish and review times on that. So I doubt we'll be getting to council in July. August. I mean, people are showing up, obviously, and revenues are coming in. Teresa, I don't know if you want to speak to how it's been with your operations, but I've heard from a few leaseholders that have said they've had some of their best days ever in the last couple of weeks. So that bodes well, knock on wood, but that could change in a heartbeat. So we're hoping they can hang on in through July, and then we can get to the council as soon as we can in August. Kind of depends on the stakeholder group and what kind of good input we can get from them, and then get to council.
Okay. As it relates to agenda item number 2, I'm going to go down the line, see if you have any questions or comments. Charisse?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Mark, you got anything else?
One thing I had was you indicated that our budget numbers for the next fiscal year, you're carving back by about 25%. Is that what I understood?
Well, talking revenues or expenses?
Well, it looks, basically top and bottom, correct?
On the revenue end, I budgeted for a reduction in percent gross revenues from basically what I budgeted this year, which was a look back to the year before. And it's pretty consistent. It's 450 to 500,000. I'm estimating we're going to get half of that. It'll be down 50%. On some of the, what I call discretionary vessel and other fees, I've dropped them down 25%. Slip fees, mooring fees, our slip, we've got some agreement with our commercial fishermen where we've got a slip fee increase starting October 1. We've got a liveaboard fee increase starting October 1. So those will hold steady or increase somewhat. Mooring fees went up by a CPI last fall, and so those should hold. The remainder of our fees should hold okay. So those are the revenue assumptions I made. On the expense side, I went into what I would call sort of discretionary spending items, although, we were cut pretty thin already and cut them even more. And then, like say, some layoffs. So no, on the expense side, there's no general reduction number that I was targeting. I cut things back as much as I could, and it ends up being what it ends up being. And actually, our cost allocation in next year's budget is less than this year because they continually adjust that based on services we're getting, and we're getting less service. So that number's actually gone down a fair amount. I want to say 40 or 50,000.
So strictly looking at the numbers, your budget for the 2020 versus the 2021 has gone down about 15% overall, which is a fair characterization.
That could be. I could do that math, but I didn't do that calculation.
That's what I read it as.
Well, let me do math. Expensive 2021. I don't want to kill too much time here, but
I was just speaking budget to budget.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Okay.
The straight numbers on expenses, it's 8% less.
All right.
From budget to budget, budgeted expenses.
Correct. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
A lot of stuff we have no control over. Personnel costs, there's not a lot of control. Utilities, fuel, I can't really just randomly cut those.
Mark, anything else on this agenda item?
Yeah, one other question is how did you handle the PERS allocation? Is it going up or going down?
That number I just get from finance. Yep. I have no control over. I can look. Let me hang on one second. Talk amongst yourselves.
Would this be are we going to have a time to talk about the final thing after, or was the only opportunity for me to talk before Mark started talking?
What is the final thing, please?
Just possible revenue sources, how to deal with the budget.
I'll bring you back in because this is.
That's the time.
Well, we can
talk about ideas.
Either now or when we get to agenda item number 1, which is fine.
Okay. All right. You got it.
Agenda item number 1 is about hard money, so sure.
Okay.
So looking at my budget numbers from finance for the PERS stuff, there's 3 different breakouts for that. And I don't ask me what these actually are. I'm just going to read you what they are. PERS normal cost. In this year's budget, it's $93,670, and next year's budget is $93,365. So it hasn't changed. PERS unfunded accrued liability. I think there's various names that's called, but that's kind of the PERS payback to catch back up from all the years that PERS said we didn't need to pay them money, and all of a sudden they decided we do. This year's budget is $95,002. Next year's budget, $114,000. So that's gone up almost by $10,000.
Almost 20.
I'm sorry, almost by no. Yeah, that's gone up.
Thank you.
Almost by $20,000. And then there's a other post-employment something cost that was nothing this year, and it's $7,000 next year. So gone up by 25,000, more or less.
Thank you.
Is that for the entire city?
No, that's just the harbor fund.
That's just okay. Yeah.
I would imagine the city's general fund is commensurate.
Yes. Yeah. Such a well-managed fund. I don't mean the city's general fund. I'm talking about PERS. Okay, Mark, anything else?
Nothing further.
Okay. Dana, I skipped over you.
No, nothing to
Agenda item number 2.
Nothing to add.
Okay, sure. Okay, thank you. Charisse, you had something on your mind?
No, I'm going to talk about it with the next agenda.
No, well...
That makes sense.
Charisse, would you, while I'm moving down the line, would you take a look at the description for agenda item number 3 and tell me whether you think there's a spot in there for that? Otherwise, we'll deal with it now.
All right. Well, if you want to let's just deal with it now. I'm not going to read to make sure.
It's money related, right? So.
Right. Just as far as income and about, are we ever going to have a moment where we talk about our own feelings about paid parking? Or, I know that we've talked about mobile home. Would this be the time to talk about paid parking or another possible income source?
I'm looking at agenda item number 1 right now to see if it might fit better there.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think it fits in agenda item number 1. And so far as paid parking is concerned, I think the city has some current information which they could share with us. It's not the end of the road for paid parking, but it's some current information. Eric, are you comfortable discussing that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable, and I can tell you on the paid parking front, a couple meetings now, and the Tuesday's meeting, the council okayed the city staff moving forward with starting to down the paid parking path, which starts with finding a company that does that stuff for a living and starting to lay it all out and see what areas you'd encompass and rates, and starts looking at the whole thing and doing a study basically. And that's where I'm assuming all the input we gave last year, or 2018 it might have been. We had that list of things we gave that here's if you can do paid parking, here's what you need to consider.
Yeah, 18.
That will get thrown into the mix. So we're going down that path. Ultimately, it takes the city council approving it down the line in a program, but we're heading down that path.
And as I understand it, it's not just the city council.
What do you mean? Just
Coastal Commission.
Oh yes, Coastal Commission has to approve as well.
And the history of them doing so, and from your knowledge, is what?
At present, they don't appear supportive.
Are we talking about the Embarcadero?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know that I brought it up in a different situation with the lease policy, and I still feel like it's a valuable possible income source. And maybe I'll just say it here, and Eric, you can say why it would be shut down, or it's not possible, or maybe it's something that we could look into, but is actually capturing some fee to visit Morro Rock. So in other words, having a kiosk. I've mentioned, I mean, it's not ideal, but to me, it would be a nice way to get some income that directly will go into the harbor fund. And when somebody comes up and it's $1 or it's $2, they'll be like, okay, well, that's fine. I want to spend this little amount of money in order to know that I am being a part of preserving this beautiful space. And so a lot of people won't have a hard time with that.
I do.
Okay. And therein lies the fact that if you're local, you would show your driver's license, and there would be a reduced, if not zero fee for residents.
So, Sharice, I think that fits into paid parking. That's a paid parking issue.
Okay.
Which will fit into the larger effort to look at the whole Embarcadero, and it's going to look at the rock and probably the pit and everything waterfront, I would imagine.
All right. So just to get
I don't see that going as a separate, let's go pursue some kind of a fee to go visit the rock thing. I don't see that happening. It's going to get wrapped up with the larger paid parking discussion.
Okay. All right. Just because this is a moment where I can say it is that I have actually been pro paid parking on the Embarcadero. Right now, with everything going on and seeing the way that San Luis Obispo City dealt with taking away paid parking in order to help a lot of the businesses capture back some of the visitors, I worry that adding that paid parking at this particular juncture in time is kind of hitting just another hit to the small businesses that just need whatever they can get at this point in time. So I know paid parking is probably still, even though we're talking about it, still a year or so out. So it might not even have an effect, but I want to just put it down there that as far as small businesses that pay for the harbor department, that we should not at least try not to tax them even or burden them even more into not being able to do business.
That point is well taken, but given that it is government we're talking about, there's no conceivable way that it would happen in less than a year, if not longer.
Agreed.
And hopefully we won't be in the situation we are in the future.
Okay.
But your point's well taken. Okay, anything else, Sharice?
Nope.
Okay. Agenda item number 2, Lynn?
Yes, I had a question. I don't know about the subtenants or the smaller shops along the Embarcadero. I have heard, I guess, rumors that a number of them will not be reopening after when the opening does come, when complete opening comes. And I'm wondering how many of these shops are closing. Perhaps they do not pay rent directly to the harbor department, that they're not major leaseholders, but they're subtenants. So it would not be felt by the harbor department if they close, and those places are not filled immediately, those businesses.
Well,
so how many? Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, finish.
Well, no, I was just going to make sure you understood my question.
So we would feel it in the long term because it's going to be decreasing revenues on that site.
Right.
I have, and Sharice and Lori can jump in, but I am aware of at least 2 that have definitely closed their doors, Junk Love being one, and the Babylonian Soap Company. Sharice, you got your ear to the ground probably closer than me out there, and Lori, you get phone calls all the time. Those are the 2 that I'm aware of. There may be more that are thinking about it. Retail's open now. It's still, you're still restricted to a degree and how many people you can have in, but it's open and going.
It just seems like I've seen more doors closed than just those two, but I may be wrong.
I'll speak just a little bit as far as what I've experienced. Yeah, we're busier. Yeah, our numbers are my numbers are close to what they were last year. But with a deficit of 2 months and the future with COVID looking the way that it is, and we're not even in the flu season yet, I fear that as soon as some of us get through this summer, and we already know we're very understandable that as soon as September 1st hits, it just dies down for us. Imagine it dying down and then having to have everybody shelter in place, or the fear of just the economy crumbling is going to put a lot of people come September 1st wondering if they should just go bankrupt or just take the money that they got from summer and hold it as close as they can. I really worry about the people who are going to show their close their doors after summer. And I would want for anything that we could possibly do in order for them to take that, risk. They're business owners. They want to do that. And so we might not see them. We only see the two. But it's definitely something that happened with somebody else that I know, not here, but because their season's over, they closed their doors.
Thank you.
Anything else, Lynn?
No, none.
Okay. Gene? Agenda item number 2.
Yes, I had a couple of people call me up in the last couple of days that are financial investors and they're looking for a property on the Embarcadero. So I think at this time they think that that's a good place to invest money into. So I will pass those names on to Eric later on. And then Eric, I think you've done a great job in reactionary. I just hope that we don't just forget about this and say, okay, let's go full blown and commit ourselves to too much capital improvements or too much spending in the future. We based our projected income on a rosy outcome, and unfortunately it didn't happen. So I think we need to be a little cautious from now on. That's it.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. Page H40. The staffing that's indicated for fiscal 1920, Eric, is that the current staff complement? In fact, you got to put your mic back on, buddy.
Thank you. 1920, is that what you asked about, that column?
Yes.
1 harbor director, 1 business coordinator, 1 patrol supervisor, 3 harbor patrol officers, 0 admin techs. Yes. Okay. Full-time? Part-time?
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. The answer.
Yeah, we don't have 1,100 harbor maintenance people.
I thought you might not, actually.
3,225 reserves. That's a little.
It's ours, buddy. It's ours.
Yeah. Oh, you're right.
It's ours. Okay, so the answer is for the 1920 column, that is the current staffing.
Yes.
Okay. And on the 2021 column, what is the currently projected staff complement for 2021 under the present circumstances?
Same.
Okay. And H42. So the fiscal 1920 column says estimated. Is it not known at this time?
I believe if you go 1 column to the left, that's the budget, the amended budget. Estimated is, I believe what that is my estimations of the 20% less revenues and some of the other things. That's probably a month and a half ago when we started making some projections how we might end this year. That's what that column is. Those are our
Okay,
estimates.
that's very useful. Thank you. Okay. And is that tracking? Are those numbers tracking currently? 6 weeks later?
So far, yes. The unknown is the percent gross because we won't see that until July.
Understood. And the fiscal 2021 column says proposed. When were these numbers proposed?
Well, the budget was a work in progress up until publication week before last.
So it's currently proposed.
Well, this is the budget that was just approved on Tuesday. When we printed this agenda, the council meeting Tuesday hadn't happened yet.
Oh,
it's not a proposed anymore. Now it's approved.
Oh, okay. The numbers as listed have been approved.
Those have been approved, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's great. H43, key projects. One of the line items is continued collaboration with Castle Wind on the offshore wind farm power generation project. So I appreciate that collaboration with Castle Wind might be ongoing. What is the city's current vision as to when, if ever, wind farm generation might come to fruition off the coast or near off the coast of Morro Bay?
Boy, that's a $64,000 question.
$64 million question.
Yeah, it's $1 billion most likely. Well, as you know, it depends entirely on Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, and them putting the whole process out to lease. It got hung up year before last with the Department of Defense objecting to a lot of the areas. BOEM and Castle Wind and others had been negotiating, and our Congressman Carver Hall with DOD trying to work that out. They were getting pretty close early in the year, January, February, when all of this Corona hit. I've actually got I'm on a conference call next week with our mayor and the task force, the state task force, the state and federal task force that's put together to marshal this process forward. So I'll know some more information there. But as I recall, before Corona hit, the general thinking was the end of 2020. Potentially, they would have some areas out to bid. But what's happened with coronavirus and all the revenues and delays, I have no idea. Hopefully we'll find that out.
Do you have any information as to whether Castle Wind and its partner are still players?
Oh, they're still players, yeah. They're still very actively engaged.
Okay, it's good, seeing as how they've got a first right of refusal on the pipeline. Okay. Support Coast Guard, another bullet item, support the Coast Guard with completion of their building expansion project. Can you give us just a very brief update on that project?
They are getting their building permits final approved right now. They're pretty far along. They wanted to start in June, but we've held them back into August just because tourist season, and even that discussion started happening before Corona hit too in March, and all the closures started. So in hindsight, maybe what I thought differently, but they're looking at starting in August sometime, getting under construction and building that and doing it.
Okay, well, public construction projects were not stopped by Corona considerations.
No, it's just the contract, whether the contractor got any delays with although they're probably contractually obligated with the federal government as well. So,
okay. And another bullet item is in conjunction with the Coast Guard project, internally and externally reconfigure the Harbor Department office, which would be a wonderful thing. I think the HAB has mentioned this before, but I'd like to mention it again, and that's the concept, not the notion, but the concept of putting together a public funding drive. Given how beloved, and I mean seriously and literally, the Harbor Department is to the community, how much money would you need to do that?
To build a new office?
No. Reconfigure.
Oh, I don't know. I just personally plan on putting on my nail bags and doing some of it myself.
Well, and that brings me, that's another form of a public funding drive. I think that if the Harbor Department organized itself to do that, there's no doubt in my mind that a construction crew with skills, appropriate skills, could be marshaled.
Yeah, I through the friends maybe.
So exactly. So what would be necessary?
Well, that's thank you for bringing it up. And I don't mean to make too much light of it, but the internal configuration is mostly moving me out of this office back over into the southwest corner and dividing that room up, and then the front public entry will be on the street side where that little pergola is out on the parking lot where it's supposed to have been. And then we'll get, because that's an ADA accessible door, we can put a couple ADA accessible parking spaces out there, and as opposed to the step we've got out back now, and then Harbor Patrol moves out into what's now the front. So it's mostly just furniture moving, but there is going to be some hard costs in moving things, and Coast Guard's paying for the parking space changes as part of their project. But I appreciate that, and I don't know the answer to the number, what it might cost. I haven't really looked at that, but it's a good question, and I will look at that. So I think that would be a great public project.
Would a building, for what you have in mind or what the department has in mind, would a building permit probably be required or not required?
No, we don't. The city doesn't permit itself. If anything structural had to happen, obviously I'd have to bring in the building inspector and maybe the fire marshal to make sure we're staying good with all the codes, but
so
don't anticipate any permits.
So you don't need to do anything with the entry, anything structural with the entry on the east side?
I don't believe so. There's a little sill there that the door sits on that would have to get knocked out, and we'll probably have to redo the door. But otherwise, not that I'm aware of.
You'll probably have some handicap issues.
Yeah.
Very small.
You mean going into that door, Gene?
In the door and in the building itself.
Particularly the restroom.
Well, the restroom it's not a public restroom, so.
It's immaterial.
That's the office rebuild.
Well, I'd like to plant a big seed deep and hard in that.
Okay. Well, I'll start fleshing that out and seeing what that looks like.
Okay. Page H44. There's a bullet item that says complete concept design and cost estimation to apply for a new launch ramp renovation project grant from Division of Boating and Waterways.
Yep.
I thought that I got the impression, I hope I'm wrong, that was dead.
Well, it is, and that's in agenda item 1. You'll bring that up. But yeah, the DBW grant we gave back because we couldn't reconcile the scope and cost issues that were going to lead to a financial train wreck for us. Last year at mid-year, this year and this current budget year, I went mid-year and got $60,000 allocated for us working up our own scope and project concept and cost estimating. You'll find out in agenda item 1, I'm kind of got that on hold too, just not knowing where we're going with all this Corona stuff financially.
Okay.
But so the intent on that is rather than the DBW scope and concept and cost estimation that they gave us and said, here, put this in your grant, which turned out to be a bad idea. We'll work up our own project scope and cost and design, basic concept design, and then submit that to DBW for a new grant next April.
And that's budget, that as a budgeted activity?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a timeline?
Well, the grant application needs to go in by April, end of April next year. So I would anticipate working that up this fall.
Okay.
After the Corona dust settles and we know where we're at.
Okay. Page.
Oh, Ron's frozen. You're frozen, Ron.
Timed out.
Need another cup of coffee.
Ron, if you can hear, you're frozen. And we don't hear anything from you. In fact, I don't see him as a participant. Laura, do you see him as a participant anymore? I think he's gone.
I do.
Oh, there he
AJC, can you help us out with that?
With what?
He seems to be in the panelist list, and I'm not sure.
No, he just dropped out.
Yeah, he's out now. I don't see him.
He must be having connection issues. He's gonna have to call back in. We'll have to promote him back to panelist.
All right.
Okay.
I'll send him a quick text. Hey, we'll see what that does.
Technology is
Got
great
anything?
when it works.
While we're waiting? Lynn, Sharice, Mark, Dana, I think you guys all had a whack at it.
Good.
Yeah, I splintered my stick.
Well, since we have a few minutes for miscellaneous questions on the revenue list on page 42, there are 9 items there, and where's the other thing? They're not, to me, very self-explanatory. What is covered in each one? For example, the revenue from leaseholders from rent, under what category is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just got a text from Ron saying technical problems, working on it. Yeah, those categories don't match, our line item type categories that we typically have. So they're kind of lumped in. So intergovernmental, I believe that's grants, charges for services. That's our leases, charge for services. Charge for services, Bodo, that line's blank, which is interesting. It's probably in the greater line, the larger charge for services line. Launch ramp is the launch ramp parking. Fines and forfeitures, that's probably penalties, late fees, that kind of stuff. Tickets, any citations we write where there's a fee we get out of that. That's probably all in there. Use of money and property, I guess that's rentals, which we don't have any of per se, not as they classify them.
But there's been actual income from it in the past.
Yeah, there has. And maybe just things of categorizing differently under the current financial regime.
You ran out your mooring.
Other revenues, no idea what that is in particular. Other revenues, lifeguards. Obviously, our lifeguards generally don't generate a lot of revenue. Although one year they got $1,100. And then interfund transfers in. That's usually if we do, we like the $60,000 for the launch ramp. That'll be a transfer in. That'll be a $60,000 will come from the accumulation fund into our operating budget, and then we'll expense it out in the operating budget. That's probably where that will be. Okay. So yeah, those are, and I'm just guessing that those are because of the finance program and how it classifies things, and that's just the way that program is.
Thank you.
Still no Ron, looks like.
No, he hasn't shown up in the attendees or anywhere else.
Okay. Well, let's wait a couple more minutes. Dana?
I got a question. How much revenue is there from the Coast Guard?
Lori, we get a dollar. No, we get $1 a year for their building next door. We get $700 a month from the storage yard out by the creek. And Lori, what's the number for the slips and pier?
Dollars.
I'd say about $35,000
Oh,
total for the storage shed and the slip pier.
For the year.
For the year. It's a year. Yeah.
And that includes the storage shed out on the pier?
That includes, yeah. So it'd be the pier, their slips, and the storage shed out at where the Commercial Fishermen's Organization is.
So I have Ron back in as a panelist.
You there, Ron?
Yeah. Where are we?
We were just having a couple more questions. You cut off. You said Paige, and then you disappeared.
Yeah, H48. Is there somebody else in it right now?
No, we just Danny just finished with a question, I think.
Okay, H48.
Yep.
The 2021 column has lease auditing inspection actions 35 to be audited. My question is, how will that be administered and when?
Well, that's a good question. That was, as you know, being on the lease policy update group, we looked at that and had that as a fairly high priority to get underway as soon as we get the new lease policy in place. As you'll see in agenda item number 3, when we get there, we're recommending, based on a couple different things, one, just staff capacity in general, and number 2, with all this coronavirus and closures and revenue angst going on, we're recommending not going forward with doing the actual auditing. Put together a system and metrics and how we're going to go about it, a process this coming year, and then execute it in 2021 calendar sometime.
Okay.
So that numbers should be updated.
Okay. H49. In your budget overview paragraph, you say, while some grant funding will be acquired to help meet the funding needs, a significant shortfall will continue to exist, and major replacements will only be completed on as needed and as funding is available basis. So this has to do with harbor equipment, which includes, I presume, a lot of the public safety related equipment. What do you anticipate will be the impact, if any, on public safety activities from this budget hit?
Well, the main ticket item on that is patrol boats. We've got one 30-plus-year-old boat that needs either replacement or a major refurbishment, which is several $100,000. We've got a grant application in for DBW right now to potentially purchase a surplus patrol vessel. Did we lose Ron again?
No, right here.
Oh, there you are. So operationally, fortunately, we've got a relatively new boat that's got plenty of life left on its engines and is, knock on wood, functioning perfectly. That's our mainstay. But we need to replace our older fleet, refurbish our older fleet, and which will keep it going, but at some point cuts into our operational needs if our main boat goes down, which it can do. So we're relying, fortunately, we got the Coast Guard right next door that's capable of doing, pretty much all the same types of emergency response other than firefighting. So that's the downside, is when our main boat goes down, we get pretty thin.
Okay. Page H50. Summary of revenues and expenditures, harbor equipment replacement. Under revenues, there's a 2021 proposed grant of $85,000. Is that in the bag? Is it likely? Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yes, no, that's not in the bag. That is the DBW grant I just mentioned to purchase Port San Luis' surplus harbor patrol boat. pending, we applied. It was due back in April. DPW's evaluating all their grant applications right now. We have no word yet. So not in the bag. Typically, we find out on DBW grants in July-ish, maybe August, depending on what type of grant it is. But the equipment grants are usually a little better than our derelict boat grants, which can take months and months and months. So hopefully we find out in the next month or two.
Okay. And the boat is still available?
As far as I know.
Okay. Page H52, which has to do with the accumulation fund, from which infrastructure monies, maintenance and repair and improvement monies come from. The last sentence says all capital projects, with the exception of repairs that may be needed for the ice machine, are on hold at this point, as the accumulation fund may be needed to help offset losses to the fund due to COVID-19 and lower than anticipated revenues being received. What can you tell us about projected impacts on infrastructure?
Well, the main capital project funded and attempting to grind its way along is my Beach Street slips replacement project. So I'm put a hold on that. I mean, that could be the potential largest victim of revenue loss from the accumulation fund.
Eric, let me break in on that. Is it possible for the commercial fishermen to take over those slips and build them themselves?
It's possible. I met with them either back in November, it might have been in the fall or early this year, and they had several different potential ideas as an organization to potentially take over the slips. That unfortunately, even if they were to take over and hire and build, it still has to be at prevailing wage because it's public infrastructure.
Okay.
Which is one of the major savings, as you know, if you can not do it that way. But we had to talk to them, and they were interested in what it would actually look like. I'm not sure, but I think we're still open to about anything. I'm not gonna discount any possible solution for that.
Yeah.
If you create them as a master leaseholder for those slips, is that still one where you have to have those guidelines?
That's a good question. I don't know. Good question.
That is a good question. And a follow-up on the H52 question. Of the infrastructure projects that are in your capital list, which are and I think it speaks for itself with the numeric rating system that you have, but if it does, just say that. Which are the most critical?
That.
Okay.
The numericals that are included in that staff report, the number ones and 1As, I think maybe there's 2As in there, but yeah, the number ones, you'll see in my PowerPoint when we get to that item, the prioritization really hasn't changed much. If anything, things have gotten to be higher priority. So something's a 1, it's now a 0.
Yeah, we should have gone the other way, 1 to 10.
Yeah, I've run out of scale.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have anything on agenda item number 2? Hearing none, we'll go back to agenda item number 1.
And Ron, I'm going to, Councilwoman McPherson came on. Marlis is on. So I don't know if now might be a good time. You wanted to give her a chance to speak at public comment, but she wasn't quite on yet. So now might be a good time.
I did. Ms. McPherson, are you with us?
Yes, she's there. I'll allow her to talk. Ms. McPherson?
Yes, I am here. I was able to get into the meeting, and I have not missed any of it. I was first watching it on television been getting in, but I am in and I am listening, and I am still your advocate. So yes, I'm here.
Well, at the end of public comment, I intended to invite you to comment in any way that you would like relative to this agenda or any other harbor business. Do you have anything that you would like to share?
No, I'm just very interested in your reaction. I know this is the first meeting you've had in some time, and so I think it's really important to listen to what your comments, and I'm just soaking it up, taking copious notes, and that's what I intend to do. And if you make any recommendations, I will certainly bring them back to the council. So
okay,
I'm just here to listen.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for doing so. Okay, we're going to go back to agenda item number 1, which is exemplified actually by agenda item number 2. Eric?
Yeah, I'm going to pull that up. Another PowerPoint here. Give me a second. And I will share. Okay. Everybody see that okay?
I can.
Okay, so review and input on the harbor capital and operational needs. The spreadsheets, I updated them a week or so ago, a couple weeks ago. Nothing really with numbers or prioritization, but just getting them cleaned up and updated. The 3 spreadsheets, the capital replacement, which is, replacing slips and big stuff. Major maintenance, which is, dumping a bunch of money, like say into electrical system on a set of slips every 20 years or something like that. And then equipment, which is our boats, vehicles, lifeguard power, that kind of stuff. So those are the 3 spreadsheets. They're, like I say, they're regular refined, though they don't change much with regard to priorities, and they haven't changed much. Per your question earlier, the priorities are still the same priorities. They include most of our facilities and all of our equipment. We've had the discussion about revetments and seawalls, but they do not include public rights-of-way type things, and probably should. Not just seawalls and revetments, but streets, sidewalks, walkways, parking lots, public restrooms, all those other things that are in the Tidelands Trust. Typically, depending on what those things are, the streets have typically been taken care of by the general fund and the public works department by way of all the streets and other taxes that they get. Generally takes care of that kind of stuff. Parking lots too, but restrooms, a lot of times the recreation department or facilities gets grants and does those. So then there's a cost allocation. So, but they're not on there. They probably should be. It would be a lot more to track, and it's really more of a public works or facilities function than it would be a harbor function. So that's why I don't generally look at them. Although from a asset and liability standpoint, it probably would be good to have those things on a spreadsheet somewhere.
Is that by way of saying that Public Works does not?
Well, I mean, they have all the streets and parking lots, all the pavement type stuff listed in their programs and in their methodology. I would imagine they have it listed out as to what's needed when and the cost. They've got their priorities that they do with Measure Q and other money. So I suspect they have the asphalt related things covered pretty well. Restrooms, I would think facilities has those listed out and costed out, but I don't know. I've never been involved with those.
Eric?
Yep.
Didn't we recently allocate $40,000 of the Castle Wind grant or the Castle Wind lease payment or advance or whatever we want to call that to a restroom project?
We did. That was the Coleman restroom. That was a council approved project, and it looks like Ron froze and disappeared again. We did. So far, from what I'm understanding, that project is grant funded, and it looks like the grant funding's covering most, if not all of it, and so that $40,000 may not be needed. But yeah, that was an approved project last year. which is still moving forward from my understanding.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully Ron slides back in here, but I'm going to keep going. So from a capital standpoint, current fiscal year, 1920, my approved projects are, again, the $250,000 launch ramp engineering and permitting grant that I spoke of earlier. We gave back, reapplying hopefully next spring with our own project concept and cost estimating. $42,000 to the South T Pier for some needed repairs there. $10,000 to the North T Pier for some needed repairs there. $10,000 to the ice machine, commercial fishing ice machine that we're contractually obligated to make up the difference in maintenance from what Santa Monica Seafood pays to what the actual costs are. There's a formula there that I won't go into, but typically $10,000 covers our obligations there every year. $370,000 to the Beach Street Slips Replacement Project. That's out of all those. So all those items 1 through 5, Roman numeral 5, are all out of our accumulation fund. And then 250, although you make a good point, Mark, of 40,000, I think it was 40, went towards the restroom. So it would leave 210 of the Castle Wind Community Benefit Agreement Fund. We went to council last summer on that. Might have been winter. I can't remember. Too much going on. To allocate that money to the 2 T piers. We added at mid-year. And again, all those, with the exception of the ice machine, which we're contractually obligated to do, I've put all those things on hold for now until we see how we come out of the COVID pandemic. Obviously, the Castle Wind project is a little bit of a different animal. That's not our accumulation fund, and the Castle Wind monies we wouldn't be spending to make up operational or other shortfalls. So that money will still sit in its own dedicated fund.
So from my understanding, items 1 through 5, zero has been expended this 1920, correct?
Approved in 1920's budget.
Right, but expended?
Have not spent any of them.
Good, thank you.
I mean, I spent some, I want to say some on South T Pier last summer, but the majority of that money's still in there. So no, none of those have been expended. We just put a hold on them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a 2-step process. One, you get approval. Then second, we need to obtain funding.
Well, get approval, then spend it. So the money's in the accumulation fund, 400 and some odd thousand in the accumulation fund. Approved project gets on the list, have a dollar amount to it, council approves it, then we go do the project and we pull money out of the accumulation fund and pay for it.
Thank you.
So status I just went through is a repeat. Castle Wind money waiting to kind of regroup on Corona and what we're going to move forward with projects in the future. So everything's pretty much kind of on a hold to see what happens. My projects I've got in my budget for this upcoming fiscal year, requested projects, dollar amount to be determined. South T Pier, the critical funding for some structural repairs, probably pull that from the Castle Wind Fund. Same with some North T Pier structural assessment and some repairs from the Castle Wind Fund. And then the ice machine, again, we're contractually obligated with Santa Monica Seafood. That's the only thing I put in my budget. The remainder are basically kind of on what I'm calling a COVID hold, $60,000 launch ramp project and $370,000 Beach Street project. Waiting to see how we come out of Corona and this summer and what revenues look like. So from the HAB standpoint, then what we're asking for from the Harbor Advisory Board, and I guess ask if there's any other input, does the Harbor Advisory Board concur that these are going to be our continued priorities?
Well, since Ron's not available, I'll
You're
take
the vice chair.
I'll take the role here. Let's just start from left to right. Gene?
Yes, I'm okay with what we have projected.
Okay. Lynn?
I see no reason to change the priorities.
Okay. Charisse?
I'm good with that.
Okay. Dana?
Yeah, I would concur also. I know the Beach Street slips really need replacing. But anyways, we just hope for the best.
Yeah, hope for the best and continued funds. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Eric. What's next?
Well, let me go on down the PowerPoint here. If additional funding were made available, when we find the pot of gold, a list of operational and capital needs. I guess most of these are capital. If additional funding were made available from some source or revenues come in a lot better and we start doing well, the Harbor Advisory Board's input on the priorities we just left, those are the first list. Those are the number ones. Are these the next ones on the list? And I pulled these from the capital spreadsheets. These are basically all the number ones and the 1As. Does Harbor Advisory Board have any input or anything to say on what might be the priorities out of these A through H items, or A through G items, or anything else?
I think we've reviewed these several times. I feel that there hasn't been anything intervening to change our viewpoint.
No, except they've gotten more urgent.
Does anybody have any dissent to that list that we're presenting?
No.
Do we want to go in as kind of prioritization, or a 1, 2, 3, or a number one?
Well, I think that would probably be of this list. I'd say that'd probably be best when that pot of gold is identified.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess otherwise it's an academic exercise, isn't it?
Right. And then of course, priorities may change in 6 months to a year. It could be we have a big storm and we lose half of the T-docker up here or something.
Okay. Any others not on the list?
Eric, on the South Tip here, you have a 1 for the priority. What do you entail for the capital improvements there?
The major thing we have there is there's a bent that has a funky splice and a couple of bad pilings that needs to be reworked. That's the main item on the South Tip here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
What do we have next?
Operationally, again, if money falls into our lap, these items, I just kind of went down the list and tried to categorize into what our priorities are. Different operational needs. A, lease and property management. That's basically our whole lease program. B, public safety, obviously harbor patrol, lifeguards. C, public property and facilities. That'd be things like restrooms and the boardwalk and the facilities we have out there. And these aren't in any particular order. D, business administrative management. That's basically the business operations, keeping up with accounts receivable and taking money and doing all the things we do in the business end. E, front office, public interface and office management. That's basically our public facing section of the department and being a public service department. Training and professional development. That kind of goes across the board from public safety folks to, management folks. Ron just texted me back. Technical problems again. Zeke.
I'm here.
Oh, you're back. There you are.
I'm here.
All right. Training, professional development. G, industry participation. That's basically things like Washington, D.C. or conferences, going to do the different things we do, Harbor Masters, CMANC, those sorts of things. IT, pretty big pot of different things, but it's basically all of our information technology and support. General equipment, gear, maintenance, and repair, that's all our stuff that we use and need. And then supplies and services, which is pens and pencils and trash and electricity and all the other things.
Eric, as it relates to A through K, can you comment on whether the Harbor Department does or does not currently, and I'm being in fiscal 1920, have sufficient staff to execute A through K?
Well, right now we don't have sufficient staff for E, front office, the public interface. You know, preferably you've got somebody out there most of the time during the day that's dedicated to that and deals with, you know, it's kind of a catch-all position that routes, you know, inquiries and mails and phone calls and tasks amongst the different sort of branches, kind of a gatekeeper sort of position, deals with all the public, you know, phone calls, walk-ins. As it is now, if you've tried to call the Harbor Department lately, if Becca and Lori aren't in the office and I'm probably ignoring the phone call unless you call my direct number, because I just don't have the time to be answering the phones every day.
In the FY 2021 budget, is that position funded?
No.
Okay. So if you're looking for input relative to the Harbor Advisory Board's thinking about prioritization of A through K, what I would suggest to make good use of time is that each Harbor Advisory Board member assign a number from 1 through 11. There's 11 items. And they provide that input to you, or they can send it to me and I'll send it to you. Either way is fine with me. As opposed to going down the line this evening and asking people to, because I think it'll just get sort of lost in the...
Yeah, no, that would be fine. Then we can tabulate and take it from there instead of doing it publicly.
And by what calendar date would you like to have that input?
Anytime next week would be all right.
Okay, so...
By next Friday?
Okay, so board, we just got a task assigned to us by our Harbor Department. Each one of you, please send to Eric directly. It doesn't have to go through me. Your numbered priority, from 1 being the most important, I would suggest, to 11 being the least, which isn't to say it's not important, but the least under the present circumstances, the ordering of these items.
I'm only seeing 10 items, Ron. Am I?
Staff report.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
The public interface at the office there is pretty important. This morning, Eric and a man 50 years ago went to Morro Bay.
Yeah.
It's interesting listening to him talk. He wanted to know whether we had the old steam engine to get underway to save boats still. You still there?
Still here.
So I have a question. You want us to look at this is kind of your job, and you want us to tell you how to do it in a way here. I mean, you seem to be able to know the best way to budget and prioritize all of these different tasks. So I'm not sure why we're being asked to jump in there. I mean, you would know the best. You've been doing it for so long.
Good point.
I don't see any reason not to provide him with the input, Dana, because we each have a different perspective. Each of the seats on the Harbor Advisory Board represents a segment of the waterfront or the society. The community.
Okay.
I understand exactly what you said, because the buck definitely stops on Eric's desk. There's no question about that.
Well, you were earlier complaining about how slow government is, and this is kind of one of the things that slows it down, in my perspective.
Okay.
Anyway, it's fine.
Okay. But again, with respect, I think you represent a particular segment of the waterfront by definition. And so I guess the point I'm making is that if we provide that input, it should not be our personal opinion. And if it means that we go out and discuss and ask our constituency, our individual constituencies, then fine, we should do that.
All righty. Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Anything else on it? Did you guys get through agenda item number 1?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item number 3.
Okay, let me go pull that one up. Another scintillating PowerPoint for you. Let's see here. Okay. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so update on the lease management policy update. So as you know, for a year and a half now, we've been updating the lease management policy. We brought it to City Council on May 12th, the final version, our final draft version from our working group on May 12th for input and direction. The document itself is included with this report, as is the conveyance memo from the group. Council was pretty happy with the document itself. They didn't really have any input in terms of recommended language changes or wanted language changes. They liked it in general. We asked them for direction in 5 different areas with some recommendations that came out of the policy group. One was policy implementation and future lease management, which I'll get into here a little bit later. Another was formula for determining a lease term, or the duration, number of years on a lease. Number 3 was a lease site financing issue that we grappled with. Number 4 was city control of future lease site development and how to go about that. And number 5 was financial auditing, which is basically our audits we do every 5 years. So we asked them for some input on that. The council at the end, after a pretty robust discussion, probably went a couple hours at least. At the end, the city manager basically said, you've given us a lot of great input. We're limited on how much we can do. If we take on too much, we're dropping other things off the to-do list. What are your things, your major things you want to accomplish? And council basically said 3 things: vision, money, and management. And so we went after the meeting and got together with our council subcommittee, which were councilpersons McPherson and Davis, and went over kind of what we thought as staff would be what we would take forward with those 3 direction items to bring back to council for final policy approval. And this is what they are. So I want to get your input on these, probably on a 1-by-1 basis. First, does anybody have any questions on process, policy, questions of stakeholder group members? It was Ron and Sharice were on the group for the HAB. Any questions? Seeing none. Ron, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay. Looks like your video's off, which is...
Yeah, my videos went wonky.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay. So in the vision category, one of the sort of to-do items under that category is ensuring the lease management policies in harmony with the city's planning and policy documents, meaning the general plan, local coastal program, the waterfront and downtown master plans, all those different plans. I'm assuming that the Harbor Advisory Board is going to concur. This was more of a statement than a question, but That's really going to be dependent on those documents when they come out, and then making sure that as we manage the leases into the future, as they butt up against those policy things, that we enable those policy things through our leasing practices. So I guess the question is, does it have to concur with that general process? I assume the answer is going to be yes, because that's how it's going to have to be. But anybody have any comments on that?
Gene?
Hey, Eric, how many leases are up for renewal in, say, the next 5 years?
I'm going to count on my fingers. Sorry.
Under a handful, right?
Yeah, I'm going to probably say 4 to 5.
Then most of them are 20, 25 years from now. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, anything beyond that. Yeah, once we get this last set, I mean, really, it's Central Coast Seafood, Giovanni's, Libertine.
So my point is, what we're coming up with now won't really be applicable for 20, 25 years. So we have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, to a degree, yeah.
No comment.
Well, Gene, what you say is certainly true of the leases that have long terms, and there isn't a lot of opportunity apparently to bring those leases into conformance with what the city's vision might be next year or 5 years from now or 20 years from now. But there are quite a number of elements in the lease management policy, in the proposed lease management policy, which can be reflected directly into the lease template, and also have implications for how to manage the leases, the existing leases.
I understand, but we're not talking about revising existing leases.
Say it again, please.
We're not talking about revising existing leases. We're only talking about basically creating a new lease policy for the remaining leases that are due in 20, 25 years from now.
Well, that's an excellent point, and it is a question that the working group asked the city more than once, which is, if you wanted to make a change, can you negotiate an amendment to the lease?
Yeah.
And I don't recall a definitive answer to that, but maybe I missed it.
As a point of reference, doesn't this document go well beyond just the lease copy itself, but also the policy and procedure with regard to audit and the like, and maintenance, and better define some of those areas that are somewhat, let's say, gray areas in the lease?
Yes, the policy addresses many things, not just the leases themselves and what we might want to see in them or into the future developments, but yeah, the overall management of the leases, how we audit, how we enforce, how leaseholders are expected to act with in regard to certain things that may not be stipulated specifically in the lease. Lots of different things.
Thank you.
So like I said, that's more of a statement of the Vision A is more of a statement and a moving forward kind of process, just making sure that the two are in harmony with each other.
Well, in that regard, to my way of thinking, one of the most significant things that came out of the working group for this update is the point that the waterfront, as exemplified by these leases, is best aligned with the city's vision, and that's a formal concept as opposed to a conceptual concept. The city's vision for the waterfront and actually both sides of the Embarcadero. One of the things that the working group very quickly identified is that there isn't necessarily a lot of cohesion on those leases in terms of the appearance of the properties, in terms of some of the activities, the business activities that take place on those properties, and that it would be in the city's best interest if the city, capital C, formulated a clear vision of what it would like that waterfront to be. And that brings us back to the GPLCP, although having read that draft document, it doesn't look to me like, personally, or unless I missed it, that there's a lot of vision in there. There's a lot of code, and there's a lot of zoning, and there's a lot of land use discussion. But I would hope that, and so would several members of the working group, hope that at some point in time, the city addresses in a cohesive basis. And yes, we understood on the working group that that's a multi-decade timeline, but that it would address some sort of cohesive vision for the waterfront to the benefit of the city and its revenue.
Well, I guess my point is I was involved with a working waterfront master plan 20 years ago, and those are the rules that we're working with right now. Those are the guidelines that we have to work with now, and things have changed. So I would recommend that we have some kind of flexibility in these lease site management recommendations.
I absolutely concur.
And I think the policy does. I mean, there's multiple references in the policy to, in conformance with the city's vision, quote unquote, and that vision lives in those planning documents. I think Ron's point is those planning documents may not go far enough to really put the city in charge of what that vision looks like, maybe.
I agree.
Okay. Anybody else on A? Okay. B?
So another general agreement thing we identified was using the council goal setting process, identify and implement major policy initiatives. One of them would probably be the auditing, maintenance and financial auditing. So set that as a council goal and then there'd be objectives that the staff would have to meet to meet those goals. So use the council goal setting process to identify, and not just that policy initiative, but any major policy initiative. So use the goal setting process as the primary means to do that, to make sure that it gets established as a goal that puts funding behind it if necessary, and council driving it. So any input as I have concur with that approach?
Well, if that's our closest near-term opportunity to do that, I guess that's it.
And from a process standpoint, we're coming up on, we've got 2-year goals right now. We do a 2-year cycle, and every year in between we update them. The new goals are established basically when a new mayor comes on board, and we've got that election coming up. So that will come this coming spring. We'll start a whole new goal cycle. So yes, thumbs up.
But just to be clear, this agenda line item relates to the proposed lease management policy.
Yes. Should we be using the goal setting process to implement major lease management policy initiatives?
Can we identify the ones that, I mean, what you're trying to get at is like the auditing and making sure that the properties are kept up? Is that what we're identifying and implementing from the policy?
Those are two. Yes. What are the rest? I guess is your question.
Yes, sure. What are the rest? Those are the two that like beam out at me and.
Somebody has a big dog.
That's mine.
I mean, I haven't identified those major policy initiatives. At least not for tonight's exercise. I mean, we could, but I don't know that we need to go down that road tonight. If this is just asking you, is that a valid way to implement policy initiatives?
Well, it's my understanding, and Mr. Pearson can chime in, please. It's my understanding that the council has determined that is how it's going to spend its time and where its focus is going to be. It's through its goal setting process. So there doesn't seem to be any alternative unless the council changes how it functions.
Yes, the council implements its major initiatives through the goal setting process.
So to repeat what one of the other board members said, council requires information from its departments in order, presumably, in order for the city manager to recommend goals and objectives for council consideration. So if the essential initiatives have not yet been presented, have not been made clear to council from the proposed policy, then certainly that needs to be done. And if the department wants help with that, then it has a working group to help it. The work has already been done. So now it's a matter, I think, of just pulling out the major policy initiatives, quote unquote.
Yeah, I agree. Any other input on that?
So how about Eric, you do some pick out some of the initiatives that we should implement, and then we prioritize them as far as HAB members go in importance.
Tonight?
No.
Right now, right this second.
Oh, okay. Ron says right now.
No.
Well, as a complete document, and as a universal document that the working group has created, wouldn't the policy initiative be to implement the document?
Yes.
That's coming up in one of these three items. Yes.
Yeah. So prioritizing or saying picking and choosing between it is not critical because we're implementing all of it or not any of it, basically.
Well, obviously implementing the approving and implementing the document and putting it in place and saying this is now the law of the land,
right,
is policy initiative number one.
Right.
Yeah, but the key here is the words in B, council goal setting process. And I'm imagining that the council as a whole, much less any one of those people, those busy people, while they recognize the responsibility of approving an updated lease management policy that in terms of converting that lease management policy into their own goals and objectives process. If the essential policy initiatives were identified for them, that would assist them. I think that's, as I understand how they work, that would be time well spent.
Aren't we saying we're just asking to use the council's process?
Right. Yeah.
That's what it says.
So the process shouldn't change just because the initiatives change. I mean, necessarily. Otherwise, because it's always going to change. So you can't change the process every time it changes. Like you said earlier, Eric, you were talking about, as new officials are elected, new goals or new policy initiatives come forward. So the process should just continue. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, the new policy is ambitious. We identified a lot of shortcomings in existing policy to try and bring us to a next and better level of lease management.
Okay.
That's not just going to fall from the sky and instantly get done. It's going to take a lot of effort
right.
and people power. And so, as soon as the council approves it, it's the law of the land. And there's some pretty major initiatives in it. That doesn't mean they're all going to implement it all in the first year all at once. We're going to have to pick and choose and use the goal setting process to pick and choose those and move forward with them. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay.
It's going to be a matter of setting the metrics.
Yes.
Of implementation.
Yes.
And that's what the goal process is for, correct?
Yeah. And it sounds like you all concur with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not asking to go into those initiatives now and start prioritizing. Just
right. That's what
going to be the process.
That's what the goal process is for.
Okay. All right. So Ron, unless you got more, I think that one's beaten to death.
Yep. Go.
C. There's a couple different places in there, and we identified that the new policy endeavors to quote unquote put the city more in the driver's seat. And the example we always use was when a lease site lease is coming up for expiration, it's getting within 5 years. We've typically gone to the leaseholder and said, hey, what do you want to do? And the leaseholder says, I want to do this. And we take it to the council, and the council says, okay, do that. That's one way. The other way is the city goes to the leaseholder, and let's say we want to work with that leaseholder and say, hey, your lease is expiring. This is what we want you to do. In other words, we determine what the future is there as opposed to the leaseholder. And so putting the city more in control of that process was identified as being important in the new policy and moving forward with our lease management. So what's your all thoughts on that as a general process, a general thought, and any recommendations in regard to how to put the city better in the driver's seat? I've always, sometimes we've talked about master leaseholders, and it's their job to manage the lease site and decide who their subtenants are and what the business mix is. And we as a city have never gotten in and said, no, we don't want any more retail. We don't want no shirt shop. We want something else. We've never gone down to that granular level, but do we want to? And redevelopment and dictating more what we want to see versus what the leaseholder wants to see. So any input in that regard?
Okay, let's go down the line. Charisse? Hello, Charisse.
Sorry. I stopped video and started mute. Okay.
Your thoughts?
I feel either way. Personally, I don't feel strongly in either direction. I feel that a lot of master leaseholders would like to understand what it is the city would want before they start making all of their plans. So I'm fine either way.
Okay, Dana?
I think some direction from the city would be real helpful, especially in concern with the working waterfront part of the GPLCP master plans, the language that's in there. So I would like to see that happen a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, I believe that starting with a vision statement of what the vision for the waterfront is, and then from there deriving a set of criteria that they're looking for as in terms of a mix or in terms of a overall experience. You know, would we want to have something in terms of, a kiddie area or things that are more attractive to children? Or are we trying to attract more of a mix at a different demographic? So it's all a matter of what the city is wanting and how we implement that to, get to that goal. And having that will help everybody that has either a master lease or is a sublessee to know and signal to them if their process is going to be a valid one or whether they're, not in alignment with what the stars are saying. So that I think is important, both with regard to vision, but also communicating that vision.
Okay, Lynn?
This sort of sounds to me like the city is going to approach the owner of the lessee and tell him what to build or what kind of a business to put in. I'm sure that's a bit more detailed than what they would want to do. I could understand having a vision, a basic, very broad concept that could be communicated to all leaseholders and say, this is the kind of thing that we want, but how much detail would included if when you say put the city in the driver's seat. It just sounds rather demanding too much and asking the owner to comply with some rather detailed instructions from the city.
It's a good point, Lynn. And the example I used was probably the extreme. I think you kind of hit the nail pretty close to the head with, the driver's seat, the direction kind of things I was thinking were more broad conceptually in terms of the redevelopment, what we wanted to see. And then, Mark too brought up some good points. Maybe we want to see, more kiddie related area stuff, kind of like what Teresa's doing with her lease side, or maybe we want to see more of this. I would think it would be more broad. It wouldn't be to the granular level where we're dictating, retail versus hotel versus so-and-so.
Right.
Yeah, as a broad comment is saying, as an example, if you think of Las Vegas was Sin City, then went to the family-friendly environment, and then from there went back to being Sin City again. So in some respects, it's a matter of what do we want to be. Obviously, we're not looking to be Sin City and bring in 27 casinos, but what are we looking to do?
Okay,
but then isn't there the danger of you're putting out a vision, and if an individual's idea of what they want to do could be something very new and novel, not fit within the vision, and therefore never be brought forward?
There's always that risk.
That is, to me, a very substantial risk that you would not want to run.
Then we wouldn't have zoning.
Okay, Gene?
I think this smacks of spot zoning, and I'm not in favor of that. I do have a question on the wording of city. Does the city mean the Harbor Advisory Board? Does the city mean the Harbor Department, or does it mean uptown?
I think that's the city at large. All of the above. It's going to be this department. It's going to be city council. Harbor Advisory Board is typically not weighed, at least in recent times, until the lease policy weighed into lease matters. Maybe way back when you started on the Harbor Advisory Board when you were 22. But in recent times, hasn't gotten into lease issues. Ultimately, it's the city
council dictating what happens on the Embarcadero. I think the market will bear out what will work there and what will not.
Okay, well, one of the, in my limited experience in life with this matter, one of the tugs and pulls that I see relative to land use planning, having been involved in a little bit of building, is, are we going to be, in terms of land use planning, is whoever the we is, are we going to be opportunistic, or are we going to have a concept, a vision? And that's I think that at any given moment in time, the city, capital C, my opinion is that it needs to determine where it lands along that spectrum. There are pros and cons of both. But think about, in terms of the vision concept, think about towns, and I mean tourist towns that have a consistent theme, and the attractiveness that seems to hold for some number of people who come and spend their time and spend their money.
But Morro Bay is a quaint fishing village?
No, it's a fishy quaint village.
Okay, Gene. Okay.
I remember that when I was 22.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right, anything else on this, Eric?
Nope. You're done.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Anybody on? Excuse me?
Sorry. I was moving on to the next item.
Oh, okay.
Money. So first item there is kind of like one we looked at earlier. It's more of a statement than of anything I need to have input on. I think Harbor Advisory Board, through the Finance Committee and others, we've been beating on the drum for a number of years now that the Harbor Fund needs help, and we've got to do some new initiatives and things to address that. The council spoke that out loud and clear back on the 12th, where they recognized the financial health of the Harbor Department, with the waterfront being the city's driving, one of the driving forces economically is paramount, but it's also in jeopardy if we're to meet our operational capital needs. As we went through our budget a bit ago, operationally we're balanced, but not enough to be really thrown into the capital kitty. So we need to do something more. So I'm assuming that HAB concurs with that. I don't know if anybody else has any other input. The message has been received, and I think has been for a while now. We've got some initiatives moving forward that I'll talk to in a second here. In that vein, and again, based on council input on June 3rd budget study session and then the meeting this week on Tuesday, we're pursuing 3 potential revenue generating programs here. One, pilot RV and tent camping along the waterfront. Any such program ultimately needs Coastal Commission approval. We went to Coastal Commission staff, and with the concept of what we brought to you, over the last couple of years, a few RVs and a few key spots. Coastal Commission staff was supportive of it, and we're going to process an emergency permit. But they said move forward, so we're starting to move forward on that. And those locations are Target Rock, more not quite out of Target Rock per se, but I'm calling it that location. It's more out where the boardwalk kind of ends going towards the rock and hooks a right towards the restroom. Immediately to your left down there, down by the waterfront, is one location. Coastal wanted to see some tent camping as well, meaning people can drive in or bike in and do some tent camping. So we're having to add some spaces there. So we'll put a couple there. Coleman parking lot on the western end of it, basically up against the basketball court, is another location. Out by the creek, we had proposed to get up above the top of the creek, where we store our lifeguard towers in the wintertime. They didn't like it being that close to riparian habitat, so we've moved it across over next to our yard, or maybe even in our yard, but probably next to our yard. Another location out the Triangle parking lot in the northwest corner. So if you go into that lot and point yourself north all the way over to the far left, with some tent spaces out there as well. And then utilizing the launch ramp during the fishing season, which is basically April through December, for folks that are towing boats, can either camp in their RVs or trucks, camper trucks towing their boat, or in their boat. There's a lot of boats, as you know, you can sleep in. So allowing people to do that and charge them for it. And then during the off season, which is January through March, when there's really no activity there at all, outside the fishing season, allow half a dozen RVs in there. So coastal staff is supportive, council supportive. We're moving forward on it. Starting to finalize our documents. The recreation department is going to be managing the reservations and money part of it. They'll take the payments online. We'll manage it out on the ground, and we'll do it as a pilot basis, going through the summer into the fall, and see how it goes. Won't be a heck of a lot of investment for improvements, somewhere between probably 10 and 15,000 to get stuff on the ground, and we'll just see how it goes. Second item is paid parking on the Embarcadero.
Hang on just a second. Mark, you should feel like a proud father this year.
I do, and I'm happy to hear that it's moving forward, and it's such a rapid pace.
You invented this only 2 years ago.
I'd love to take credit, but others have told me that was an idea that's been put forth before.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. All good. Paid parking along the Embarcadero. Paid parking is has two primary uses. It's not always revenue generation, although that's one of the major components. But it's management, managing your parking issues and fixing problems and getting turnover. I mean, that's the main reason you have paid parking. So council supportive of that. Coastal Commission, not so much, unfortunately, which is strange, given that paid parking's all along the coast. But I guess maybe not for Morro Bay, but we'll see. So we're going to move forward with finding a company that does this sort of stuff for a living and studies it and figures out what our, we've done parking management studies before, which we can use as a springboard, but really see how you would implement such a program. So, that's some outside expertise we're looking at getting to see what that might look like in the future. Harbor Advisory Board, as you know, we looked at that in probably 2018 and give forward 25 recommendations to look at if we were to do paid parking on the waterfront. So those will, I'm assuming, come back into play, and hopefully that will move forward. And then item number 3 on there, or ... on there, is a local relief and recovery ballot measure. That could take one of several forms, but the most common of which is a sales tax measure, like Measure Q, an additional, fraction of a percent on the sales tax to help with revenues, not just general fund, but harbor fund as well. Sales tax, as you know, we typically don't see any of it. In fact, we don't see any of it. But if the city pursues a new measure, I think the harbor fund would be somehow included in that, or other measures or other revenue generating ballot measures. But the sales tax type thing is probably the most common and the most likely. So looking at potentially pursuing that in November. So we are looking at some revenue generating initiatives. As you know, we just did a master fee schedule update. Last year, slip fees are going up in October, liveaboard fees, those were the two major ones. The rest of the fees, some of them went up fairly significantly, but not like the slips and liveaboards. Those were the two that were very low hanging. That all got put in place before the coronavirus hit, but looks like we're getting through that. Hopefully we get through that. So those are kind of the new revenue initiatives that we're pursuing right now. So any comment, support, concurrence on those initiatives?
Go for it.
And we'll try to come up with more.
Anything else? No? Okay. Management, the third leg of the stool. Management item A, completing the policy document, including all the exhibits and getting it to the City Council for high priorities are probably our highest priority, obviously. The biggest thing to be completed in that is getting our lease template, or basically our standard master lease, to make sure we match the policy, because there's some things in the policy now that, we've got existing leaseholders, existing lease with a contract. We can't go change it unilaterally, and there's some things in the policy that may not match anymore. So moving forward in new leases, as we approve them, they need to make sure we match the policy. So we're working on that. That's our highest priority. So any input on that? Right now, July 14th is when we're tentatively scheduled to bring this to the City Council for approval. Okay, hearing none, I'm assuming you're all in wild agreement. Item B, physical and financial auditing. I think I spoke about this a little bit earlier. Develop a process. There's only so much we're going to be able to do with this policy and implementing it. We're going to have to take it in chunks. Develop a process and metrics over the next 8 to 10 months or so, and then kick it in and enact it in 2021, calendar 2021, sometime next spring. We did quite a bit in the policy document itself and really identifying how we're going to go about auditing. We think we simplified the process in terms of the data we get and what we look for. But it's still going to take some thinking to how to implement it and put it into place and execute it. And the same thing with the lease site maintenance or condition audits. We expanded greatly in the policy and what we expect and what we're looking for leaseholders with their responsibility to maintain their lease sites. So we need to put together a process and how we're going to implement that. So those we propose to be doing over the next 8 to 10 months, and then enact it early next year, or springish, maybe this time next year. Anything on that?
Eric, is the city considered, as it relates to the financial audits, and yes, there's a framework in the proposed policy, but insofar as process and metrics concerned, is the city considered getting some professional input?
Go to video.
About that?
In terms of the metrics we've got in place and getting some input on that,
well, there's people that do it for a living.
Well, give me an example.
The only firms that I know of are in Seattle, so that doesn't really help you. Well,
I don't care about the firm who does it, but what sort of professional input are you getting at? What would we ask said firms?
Knowing where we left off on this topic in the working group, we did not get down to the details, if you will, or the metrics, whatever you want to call them, for how to actually go about it. We talked about sales tax reporting,
right?
And we talked about how many leases over what period of time would be looked at. But what we didn't talk about, because we didn't know how to do it, is there some sort of a mechanical process or a financial process that streamlines all of that? Or do you feel comfortable that if the city simply takes, or not so simply, takes the sales tax information and looks at the history, goes back a couple of 3 years, that's sufficient, that constitutes an audit? Because the working group, questioned whether that's sufficient or not.
I guess to answer your original question, yes, I think it would behoove us to get some professional input in that regard. Basically, a CPA. You're correct. We identified our primary method in which to audit it, our percent gross reporting, would be by comparing against sales tax, which we can largely do in-house.
Can I put in my 2 cents about getting, in regards to actually hiring another firm to come in and do the audit? It has been done that way in the past, and it costs a lot of money, and they only did the job for a set amount of time, which resulted in a lot of the people who were audited just to not put in their information. And so it led to an expensive, lengthy thing that ended up not having really good results. So if there was to be any outside entity that was going to do the auditing besides actual harbor staff or city staff or somebody who can follow it along throughout the year until we get complete data, is to tell them that they get paid based on how many people have a full audit completed. Does that make sense?
You might have misunderstood me. I wasn't talking about outsourcing it.
Oh, okay.
I was talking about getting some professional input into how the city would go about it, the mechanics about it. And what I'm mostly interested in is making the process as streamlined as possible so the city can execute it as quickly as possible with the least impact on the leaseholders.
Right.
No, I get what you're asking, Ron. I think, to answer your question, I think, yes, I think it would behoove us to seek a little professional input in that regard. Yeah, because they would have some insight on how the books are kept and, everything else. And
it might be beneficial to also check into best practices with some of the other harbors.
That's true if they're small, if they're as small as we are, because the larger ones have
a finance department.
Yeah, well, yeah, and budget and budget for auditing. We identified, the working group in its research identified that some of the larger entities have prescribed policies and they have the budget to pay for them. Whether it's appreciated or not by the, going back to Sharice's point, whether it's an easy sell or not for the leaseholders, I have no idea.
Did we lose you, Ron?
No, I'm right here.
Oh, okay.
Are we ready to move on?
You are. Final item. Overall management of our leasing program. Continue to do it in-house, meaning in the harbor department, versus contracted property manager. I know this has been batted around on many levels. I know for us to move successfully forward into and with this new policy and implement it over time effectively. One of the things that we hope it does do, which ultimately we looked at it as a revenue generating tool, but an economic development tool, making more an attractive place for leaseholders to want to come and invest. And part of that's the lease policy. So how do we best manage our leases into the future and make it as efficient and effective as we can? And so we continue on in-house versus contracted. I know noise.
I think that's a thirsty dog.
Well, I think you just took in about a gallon.
You do have a mute button, Mark. I know something has to change, especially now we're down an administrative position. You've got, 3 administrative people, myself, a business manager and a patrol supervisor doing all sorts of things, outside of their wheelhouse to keep the boat afloat. And it's not going to be sustainable in the long term, at least if you want to keep employees around. So we need to do something different. And whether that's, we had a business manager position that we were in the process of recruiting on when the power plant announced that they were shutting down a few years early and we were going to lose $275,000 of revenue. So that put a kibosh on that back in 2013 now, I think that was. And we've never really re-looked back at that. We just manage it with what we've got. We've got to do something different if we want to be more effective. And that may be an outside company. I know we brought this to the Harbor Advisory Board at one point when we were early on in the policy update process, and the HAB's input was okay with the idea of a management firm doing it, but still needs to be under the guise of the Harbor Department, or the overall purview of the Harbor Department, and not with any other department of the city, for consistency and coherence with the harbor and all things waterfront. So that's the HAB input we've had so far. So any other input or ideas regarding moving into the future? We're working right now with our policy group, with our final assignments, looking at what, from just a rough cost standpoint, that might look like going in-house versus out-of-house, and seeing if there's any firms out there that do that or want to do that, be interested in doing that and taking that to the council. So any input you all might have on looking at those different alternatives?
Charisse?
I'm kind of on the fence on this one. I'd like to, as a leaseholder, I want to be able to pick the property manager that's going to be the oversight. But that's not really possible. You can't please all the people all the time. I don't know. It's kind of scary, in my opinion, to have a property manager that would treat us more like not personal, and not part of a community. So I don't know. I guess it just depends on who it would end up being. And
so Charisse, if you take off for a moment your leaseholder hat, and if you put on a city hat,
okay,
does that change the perspective any?
There's pros and cons to every hat that I wear when I'm thinking about a property management. I'm thinking about the budget. I'm thinking about how that would take a huge chunk out. So that worries me. But then the place would look a lot better if somebody was, going in and making everybody clean up their areas. I don't know. There's pros and cons, and I guess I would just have to know who it is that we would pick, and then how would they implement managing with all of the different types of leases, and how knowledgeable would they ever be able to be? There's a lot of data in Eric's head, and he deals with each person individually. So I don't know. I'm still on the fence, but I could. It has whatever. I'm on the fence.
Okay, Dana.
All my hats.
I think it's possible, but obviously they're going to have to work with the harbor director, the harbor department, due to the fact that it's such a complicated management area. You've got water leases connected to land leases and everything else. So I can't see a firm that just right off the bat knows how to deal with that without having a lot of conversation with the harbor department.
That it? Okay. Thank you. Mark?
Well, in the short term, I have a hard idea or a hard concept of where we would save any money by going out to sourcing it outside. 2, on the short term, I don't see that we would have a spike in revenue. So I think would be to implement the audit process in the beginning, maintain with our current staffing, and put our toe in the water, as Eric mentioned, in terms of seeing what those costs and the associated revenue enhancement could be.
I mean, ultimately, moving into the future, we need a staffer. If we keep it in-house, we need a staffer who is more dedicated with time and energy and resources to property management. That could be me, that could be the business coordinator, that could be something, but then for me to do that, I'm going to have to drop something else. And so somebody's going to have to take something else up. So it's another staffer somewhere. To me, it's a business manager, that position. So there's going to be a cost to that. You know, if we continue on as we are, we're going to continue on as we are. And we won't, I don't think, be able to effectively implement everything we want to implement in the new policy. Obviously, that takes money, primarily. And so it's going to have to come from somewhere, whether it's outside or in-house. That's, from the dollar standpoint, that's the comparison. But something has to change if we want to do it better and more effectively. So there'll be a cost, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There'll be a cost no matter what, if we're going to up our game, which we need to do.
Have you just determined that it's going to be a cost in excess of what it's currently costing the city?
If you're talking about adding a position, yeah, it would have to. For us to add a business management position, it's a whole nother funded position.
And if it was outsourced?
Whatever the contract fee is for the firm doing that.
Yeah, but there's a cost involved in it now.
Yes, there is.
And is that a known number?
Yeah, I mean, when we went through the cost recovery master fee schedule process, we all allocated our times as best we could, estimated how much we spent on leases, how many, for me, how much time do I spend on leases? How much do I spend on harbor patrol? How much do I spend on lifeguards? How much do I spend on slips and moorings? We allocated that out and estimated that out. So yeah, that is a known number.
So one way to look at it is that's the budget.
Yeah.
Okay, Lynn?
I had 2 questions, I guess. Mark, I think you mentioned auditing, but this property management job would cover a whole lot more than just the auditing, correct?
Well, the job, I would hope that a manager would take on more than merely just a financial audit role. Does that answer your question?
Lynn, you went away.
She froze.
While we're waiting for her, Gene?
We've lost Gene. Gene signed out a bit ago.
Okay.
So I have a question. Is there some reason why it would cost more to have just it in-house? I mean, so you go ahead and you hire somebody to work in the harbor department and take on this job. Is that more costly than hiring a firm to come do it? It just seems like it's not going to be cheaper.
I don't know.
Come in.
I don't know.
Yeah. I was just wondering why that, I mean,
Well,
it might come from a different, I mean, it still comes out of the harbor fund or whatever, out of harbor rather than, or does it come out of another part of a budget rather than out of your guys' budget where an employee would come out of? Is there any difference?
Well, in one respect, you can think that it may only be a half or 3/4 of a person's full-time employment, or a portion of it to do this audit and physical management of these sites in conjunction with other sites that they're doing.
You mean other city properties you're talking about?
Maybe other city properties, or in the case of where we were contracting it out, they may manage 10 other shopping centers. So there's an efficiency rather than an individual trying to work all the aspects of it.
Well, to my simple mind, the question is a basic cost benefit.
So did you
analysis.
Right.
go on to other things? Or I'm
Lynn, are you back?
still on.
Lynn. Hello, Lynn. Oh,
And we lost her again.
yeah.
And she's
Okay.
getting photobombed.
Okay, so do we have anything else on this? Anybody else? Okay, Eric, what's next?
That's it. I took down the PowerPoint. I think that's it. We asked the final question there. Wait a minute. Let's run at him.
Well, while you're cogitating, I have a question.
That's all I have.
Does the city intend to perform a cost-benefit analysis on this question?
Yes. Well, I don't know if I'm going to commit to a cost-benefit analysis, but we are going to do our best at doing an in-house versus out-of-house cost analysis, see how it pencils.
Well, you can't just do cost, sir, and without doing the benefits.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else, board? Okay. So before we adjourn, I'm reminding the board and the public that July is a bi-month for the Harbor Advisory Board. So our next regular meeting, unless we do a special meeting, will be in August.
Stay healthy.
Safe, everybody. Thank you. This seemed to work okay.
Yep. Eric, thank you. Thanks to you and Lori for doing this.
No worries. I think it's good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Zeke.
Thanks, AGP.
Still there, Zeke?
All right, bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeke.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.